Eric Davis, thank you so much for being here and supporting Avatar: The Way of Water. Let's get right into it. Be introduced James Cameron and John Landau.
Hello, everybody.
Thanks for coming. I don't even know if we need a mic. You guys can hear us back there, right? I'll use my set voice.
Gentlemen, as you know, as we sit here, two of you are responsible for three of the four highest-grossing movies of all time. Just made history at the VFX Awards with 9 wins. Congratulations on that. Clearly, you have cooked up this recipe to success between the two of you, and
Jim,
you know,
Jim.
but
We just work really well together. You guys can you hear me? You want me to use that? I'll do this.
But if somebody said, like, what are a couple of those ingredients that are really key to you that you believe in, that has gotten you here? I mean, what would you say?
Are you talking about the working partnership or the actual content of the movies? I hate content. I didn't say that.
Yeah, I would love to
The
talk.
stuff that's in the movie.
But yeah, I mean, I think there's a working partnership, and there's also kind of the ingredients that you believe in that make a powerful story, that make a film really work. And what would you say some of those ingredients are?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing, I think, is to draw some kind of line between Titanic and Avatar, because they both perform very similarly. I don't mean just box office, but I mean sort of across cultures all over the world. It didn't matter what language group or what religion or what culture you were in. Both films perform very well. So I think it's good to look at, okay, what are the commonalities between a historical, corset movie, love story, and a film like Avatar or The Way of Water. And I think it has to do with some kind of universal of the human experience. And I think we consciously looked for that especially in the new Avatar film. And what could be more universal than family? We're all either part of a family, or we probably want to be part of a family. We feel like we're missing that experience. We don't have it. Somebody's an orphan, or they're from some kind of fragmented family. But I think all human beings yearn for it. Most of us are part of a family, for better or worse. Having had 5 kids and having come from a family of 5 kids, it seemed like there's a lot of really interesting dynamics to play with there in terms of, conflict and duty and emotional bonding and reinforcement and all that sort of thing. So I thought that was important. Do you think of something else, John, that we do, like, that might be common between those two wildly different?
Well, I think Jim, one of the things that you did, which was really smart, when we brought the writers in to work on this, and we hired 3 teams of writers to help us, break down the stories of 1,500 pages of notes that Jim had. And they all came in.
Like adapting a novel, except there's no plot yet.
They all came in with all these ideas, and we said to them, we don't want your ideas. We want you to look at the first Avatar and watch it, read what was written about it, because if we don't understand why that worked, we're not going to be able to recreate that. And at the core,
well, can I just clarify? We didn't say we don't want your ideas. We said on day one we don't want to hear your ideas yet.
My bad.
Until we understand the framework of what worked on the first film.
Right, and I think it comes back to something that's important. I think oftentimes our business spends too much time on plot and not enough time on theme. And the plot, to me, is what you leave at the theater. The theme is what you walk away from the theater with. And that's what I think Jim, in all of his movies, has done, is he's put the theme front and center, and people have always walked away with something from the theater.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, I think look, plot's important, character's important. To me, there's 3 levels with an Avatar movie. There's the primary level, which is plot and character, and this happened because that happened, and because this character believed that and felt that, and this conflict, etc. That's kind of all first level. And the second level is thematic. How do you use all those storytelling narrative elements to suggest something to the audience that's kind of between the lines, and that they can process on a thematic level. In this case, obviously, it's in consciousness around nature, around our connectedness with each other, conservation of the ocean, that sort of thing. To me, that gets you to level 2. And then the level 3 is the hardest part. And this is the thing that we kind of deconstructed for ourselves in those first couple of days of going back and doing a forensic analysis of the first film, which is what's it feeling? I mean, how is the audience feeling, and what parts of the brain is it acting on that they maybe aren't even that aware of? Something about reacting to beauty, or maybe even some kind of spiritual connections that they're making that have to do with their own belief systems and so on. And that, I think, it has to do with the use of color and how you appeal imagistically to the subconscious mind, to our kind of dream engine that runs in our minds all the time that we're not even that aware of. And that's the hard part, I think.
Yeah.
But it's the part, especially with the Avatar films, probably more so than Titanic, that I think is one of the things that people can't quantify about the movie that's working for them, is how those images and those feelings, that music, that sense of being present in a moment that has a kind of dreamlike sense of wonder, but at the same time looks pretty real. Like our goal is always photoreality. We're not trying for a stylized look. And I think that creates a kind of a cognitive dissonance. I'm looking at something that's impossible, but it looks real.
Yeah. When there are so many layers to this process, is there a moment where you found it, like you've cracked it? And is that moment in the developmental process when you're filming it, or do you not have that moment until you see an audience and how they react to the finished
I could be glib and say it's right around 2 billion.
That's what it is.
But it isn't. No, it's a first of all, it's a winnowing process as you try a lot of different things and you narrow it down. And I think it's also very instinctive as you look at images and we work with some of the best designers and artists and CG artists in the world. So it's a question of, they show a lot of imagery, especially the design team. And why is it like that, not that? It's so, I think it's very instinctive. I like the flying fish creature that had more of the long snout, like a swordfish, like a big billfish, or a gar, and then it's like, okay, run with that, do something more like a garfish or something. It's like, once again, it's just like, I think for the audience, there's a component of the subconscious at work. I think creatively, as a filmmaker, it's about getting your logical mind out of the way. One of our advisors is right here, Jim Tannenbaum. He's intensely logical. He's always berating me for the big leaps that we make, floating mountains and things like that. But I actually think that artistically, sometimes you've got to get your logical mind out of the way. There's dream logic. We all tell ourselves stories all night long. Sometimes we don't remember them. Some people don't. But our brain has this kind of narrative engine running all the time. But it doesn't always have to be as logical as we think, as long as it feels right.
Yeah.
And just when you talk about that moment when you feel you've got something that you were striving for.
Yeah.
The ultimate one is when we get to screen the whole movie for an audience.
Yeah.
But I think that for me, on this film, we had already seen Jake and Nichiri, and we knew we were going to up the ante on what we could present with them. But the Tanawari sit-down scene, when Tanawari, tells Loak, sit down, and all the kids.
That's one of the first scenes we finished.
That's right. And it was 2 new characters in a new environment, and their performances. It was Kate, it was Cliff, and the detail of the costumes and the set decor. That was like, okay, we're on to something in that moment, and we got another 3 hours to go.
Yeah, you got to realize that was probably 2.5 years before we finished the film and released it. We start to see, because of our process, Weta doesn't work on all 3,300 shots at the same time and then hand them over the same day. They'll have a sequence up what they call online in their internal system, and they'll work that sequence so they get it done, and then we kind of move on. So that was one of the first scenes that was fully completed. It was about 2.5 years before the movie was done. But to just be able to sit there and watch it in 3D, enjoy these new characters, Serea, Tonawari, Ramal, Loak, and to enjoy it and feel like, okay, we're there. This is what the movie's going to look like. And it's very exciting, and it's empowering. or at least it's stress relieving, because you know that if you can hit that quality with everything else, that it's going to be something.
Yeah.
And the other really great thing, Jimmy, about that scene is we saw the actors' performances. You know, when we make these movies, these actors do what you see on the screen. And there's a lot going on in that scene.
But we're not obviously doing photography. Like a scene like that, and many, probably 85% of the scenes in the movie are 100% CG. So there's no photography involved. The water's not, I mean, we never spent a day at sea on this film. So all the water, other than when Spider, because Spider's obviously a human character played by a human actor, he's coming and going from the water and breathing on a scuba mask underwater. That's all real. But the second you step away from his character, it's all CG water. The guys on the Tulkun hunting boat, they're getting hit by fire hoses and stuff like that. But that boat was up on a 6-axis motion base.
Yeah, but you two have spent a lot of time in water. John, I was watching an interview that you did back when, and you were talking about being an avid scuba diver, and that both of you do a lot of scuba diving. And I'm curious, and you did some, and I was looking at these VFX award winners. One of them was The Reef, and I'm wondering, like, how much of those real life adventures that the two of you go on, how much does that inform what we're experiencing?
I think quite a bit. I think that we're able to speak to the artists who are working on it based on real life experiences. One of the things that Jim and I, we did a dive together in Truck Lagoon, which was this incredible place to go. And we talk about wrecks. We have wrecks in this. We have coral reefs. There were rays. There were all of those things. But it's also about how the water interacts at the surface. When you look over at someone else who's coming up on the surface, it's not just about the big waves. It's about the little details.
Yeah, underwater's actually pretty easy. I shouldn't say pretty easy. It's a complex design problem and so on. But from a lighting standpoint and from a simulation standpoint, it's relatively easy. Second, you start interacting with the interface, as we call it, between air and water. That's when it gets really fractally complex, because you've got people that were captured in water, so they're moving correctly. They can't not move correctly because the physics is correct for them. They're actually interacting with water, the force of it, the weight of it, and so on. The second you put in a creature that's keyframe animated, its fin could be moving much faster than the water could get out of the way, and then all of a sudden the simulation shows you a splash that's going 100 feet in the air. It doesn't make any sense visually. So we found that we had to loop back and go through the animation process a number of times when we're dealing with the creature and the boat animation. If the boat displaces just 6 inches too low, all of a sudden it's shooting out a bow wave that's going out too far or not far enough. So it's ridiculously complex. We knew that going in. But I think, John's a very avid diver. He lived in Florida for many years, spent a lot of time underwater. So the quality of the light, I should mention something that may not be obvious. So obviously, I think you guys can appreciate that I have to look at every frame, practically every pixel of these shots over and over again. But by the time I get to them, John has already been working on them for weeks or months. So there's an initial process where he's the first set of eyes for us as the production. And he goes through and corrects all the obvious stuff. And because we've done it for so long, he kind of knows what the visual aesthetic culture of the movie is. So before it gets to me, it's already kind of in the zone. And then I go through all my tweaks. So there's an interesting thing that happened on the first film. I was going recursively over and over and over these shots in thousands and thousands of hours. And from the first time I'd get, kind of a first look to a true final, might be 20 or 30 iterations. We had an interesting phenomenon in this film, which is that Weta had gotten so good. Our front-end process feeding into Weta was so specific and so precise. And John and Richie Bainham, who's also on our team, had looked at the shots over and over again. We had a thing that emerged called a first look final. They show me the shot, and I can't find a damn thing wrong with it. It's simultaneously kind of frustrating and kind of liberating. Because it validates our whole process, but on the other hand, but sometimes the shots are just so stunning, you'd be foolish to change them. I remember there was a couple of close-ups of Sidea, the reef girl, that I just sat there and I said, play it again. Wow, that's beautiful. And they said, so is that Is that good? Is that approved? I said it's beautiful. I didn't say it was approved.
But it's funny, like I had a friend the other day who was asking me, he went to see Avatar The Way of Water, it was his third time seeing it, and he came out and he goes, I don't understand, Eric. Other people are doing visual effects in movies, but these Avatar films are just on a different level, like a different stratosphere when it comes to visual effects. And, you know, is that, what are you guys doing that is just so different and just on that other level that you know, other movies aren't there?
I got one idea on that, and I should jump in. I think that it's the nature of the process. So you take a typical, and I'm not picking on superhero movies, but they are a vast engine of visual effects. They are, you know, kind of really supporting the industry of visual effects for not unilaterally, but a lot. And so they're doing tens of thousands of shots a year for the superhero movies. We all love the superhero movies. I do. I grew up on Marvel more than DC, but I'm also loving the DC movies these days. But if you think about their process, they start with previs and storyboards, right? So storyboards, sometimes hand-drawn storyboards, sometimes they'll go straight into previs. It's a process where you get an approximation of the shot, but it's not based on real human performance, and it's not based on the physics of real human movement. We don't do previs, and we don't do storyboards. What we do is we go into the volume, not with the actors at first, but with our troupe players. And our troupe are these highly accomplished actors that literally, I think some of them have played 20 or 30 characters in the film, all the crowds and all that sort of thing. But they also know the key characters very well. And so they can do like a proxy version of their performance going in. So we start in a working process that's already based on real behavior and real world physics. And we refine it from there. And we design, the set design is a fluid process where they'll create an environment for me to work in. I'll bring in the troupe players, we'll start running around, we start acting out the scenes. It's all rough. It's not, Sigourney's not bound in any way by what the troupe did, or Sam or Zoe or anything like that. It's just, in fact, I don't even want to show it to them because I want their creativity. But what it does is it allows me to work with the designers and with the animators and sort of figure it all out ahead of time in a way that's actually behavioral and is based on physics. So some of the superhero movies, okay, we got a 3-second shot, that's what we're paying for, that's what it was bid to be. Well, we don't work that way. We don't try to pack it into 3 seconds because that was in the contract. The way we work with Weta is we pay them by the minute. We pay them by the minute, and they don't bid on the individual shots. It can be a battle scene with 40,000 people in it, or it can be a close-up of a single character, same price. You know why? Because the close-up is just as hard as the battle scene. And I would argue maybe more so. I mean, the fate of the movie doesn't depend on the battle scene. It depends on that close-up and what that actor does in that moment. So we treat it all with equal importance. And I think that that's something that people don't really know about how these movies are done. And I also think it's such an organic process, both for me and for the actors and for the designers, that it feels more palpably real, like things have weight, right? As opposed to jumping around like a flea because you're paying for a 2-second shot and it can't be 3 seconds. You know, there's no point in the pipeline downstream that allows you to change it. I mean, they can, obviously, they can open it up, but it's not their process. Right.
And I think it's also because Jim touched on this a little bit. Our designers design things that we can make look real. They're not working out there in a fantasy world. You got to remember, nothing on Pandora exists. Our designers had to design every blade of grass. When Kiri goes down and the wood sprites are landing, that's Pandoran grass. And they design things that we can make look great. And if they didn't do that from the ships to the characters to the world, we couldn't make it look great.
You know, I think that's true of all CG problems on all CG movies. I think that maybe what's innately different from a design standpoint is that they do a lot of real world reference. You know, it wasn't just grass. They started with grass. I said, well, it can't just be grass. It's Pandora. We got to put some swerve on it. And then they start going through just thousands and thousands of pictures of reference of different plants and animals, sea anemones, all kinds of things. So we saw this thing that was called a sundew. So let's do sundew grass, And so then they started drawing up. It had these little red blobs on the tips. Yeah, I mean it's a pursuit of detail. We want it to sort of wash around and embrace the audience in a way that, if people spark to the movie, and not everybody does, but if they do spark to the movie, they sometimes will make a promise to themselves to go see it again at some later point so they can focus on the story because they'll feel their eye wandering around the environment. So we had to hit that equipoise. We wanted the repeat viewing, which I think is a key part of our success. But you got to also centralize, have a central narrative that's driving through each shot as well. But it's like some shots are just a character singing solo. Some shots you have a lot of backup singers, and the backup singers are the creatures and the other characters in the background. It's okay for the eye to kind of roam around, but you can go too far with that, and every shot turns into Where's Waldo, and you kind of lose the plot.
But that's what's so impressive, I think, about the production design of this film is that you had to design an entire ecosystem, and just down to these just minute details was just fantastic, and also the ship, like that central ship in the film. There's the look of it as being intimidating, but then you have all of these little compartments within the ship that you have these scenes set in. So there's just so much detail put into it.
When we do it, people look at this and they go, it's science fiction. When we're making the movie, it has to be science fact. It has to be the fact in our world, in the construct of Pandora. So those ships have to really be able to do those things, and the mechanics of opening up, but also the Tulkun.
Well, going back to the ship for a second, so that ship, the Sea Dragon, it's called, is based on a principle called wing and ground effect, and there are actually vehicles that work the way that ship does. They're just not widely known, but the Russians experimented with it for a long time, and they had ships that were 250 feet long, 300 feet long, that could go 300 miles an hour, and it's a ship, right? But what it does is it lifts up and it flies out of the water just a few feet, stays in ground effect like an airplane that's landing just above the runway, but it never goes any higher. And so we try to base everything on real world principles. But on the other hand, you don't let logic get in the way too much. We don't spend time explaining all that stuff to the audience. We just let them, take it in. There's actually an explanation for why the mountains float, which if anybody's interested, I can explain. We work it out, but we don't necessarily burden the audience with it during the movie. It's like, why are we going, 4.5 light years away to another star system if we can't have mountains float?
Yeah, I mean, so much goes into the ship, but then also the characters. Like, and to just go back to these VFX awards, Kiri, won an award, and to me, she's the most fascinating character in this film, and there's still so much mystery to her when we walk out of this film that we want to know about. And I mean, just talk about creating her, and actually bringing Sigourney back as well to perform it. I mean, that's just
right.
It's a risk. But it paid off, and she's amazing.
It was risky, and Sigourney, didn't quite process what I was saying when I first said, okay, you're going to be 15. There's some controversy about whether she's 14 or 15, but it doesn't matter. And the mountains float. But then she saw what an amazing acting problem that is. Because when you get to that stage of your career, you don't want to do the same things you've done. And I thought what better demonstration of the power of performance capture than to have, a 70-year-old actress play somebody less than a quarter of their actual biological age, something you could never accomplish with makeup or by any other means, And the fact that she's really clicked with the audience is one of the things that I enjoy most about this process. The other thing is, so there's the Sigourney component of it, and it actually added a little bit of an extra problem for us. When we have a young actor like Britton Dalton who plays Loak, and Britton was 14 playing 14. It's relatively straightforward. You scan their face and you get as much data as you can about how they move and how they express themselves and how their kind of facial musculature and skin and everything. And then you just put it into the character. And the character looks a lot like, we try to make all the characters look like the actors as much as possible. because we find the performance translates across easier. And we had a very, very high batting average with Loak. Whenever they just run the system, what came out in the CG character just worked. Curie was a lot more daunting because we had to take 70-year-old Sigourney and figure out 15-year-old Sigourney. Then take 15-year-old Sigourney and put it into Curie. So it was a two-step process. And we had a bit of the same problem with Stephen Lang, again, because he's, I think at the time he was 68, and his character is supposed to be, kind of 30-ish. I think he plays a little older because we kind of remember him, being that older, crusty guy. But sticking to Curie for a second. So it was a two-part process. The other thing that was dangerous about Curie, and I don't even want to talk, Sigourney can speak so eloquently about how she approached it from a performance standpoint. Basically, I just gave her free rein. I said, so you're gonna do like a voice? She said, I'm not doing a voice. But she didn't do a voice. She tried to be 14 in her mind, and it just happened. Mm-hmm. She spent a lot of time with young girls, kind of studying their behavior, reminding herself what she was like at that time, going through the whole sense memory exercise, remembering her awkwardness and her sense of righteousness and all the things that, her anxieties, the confusion, the identity confusion that kids have. I'm not necessarily talking about like gender identity confusion, just like who am I, what am I here for, and then all those other layers, setting aside her performance, because I think it's absolutely brilliant and a little unrecognized, but I think it's brilliant. We also had the narrative problem with her, that we intentionally did not resolve some of her key issues. Yeah. And so then, you kind of anticipate the eye roll sort of trolling, like, okay, sequel bait, that sort of thing. But I think if you can hit the right balance and have some things clearly unresolved, then you toggle into kind of saga mode. This is a story that plays out over a number of films, and I think we're getting more used to that now. Not just Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings film, which made that promise. In fact, the first one just drove off a cliff. What? See you next year, I guess. But I think that we're just more used to it with our series, and a series will end and there'll be the season finale, and it's like, okay, I gotta wait now to see what's going to happen with the characters again. And I think we're just more willing, if we're buying in to a fantasy world and a group of, or a fantastic world, one we know doesn't exist, and we're buying into fictional characters, and we care about them, and we want to see what happens next. I don't think it hurts to tease to a sequel that way.
No, without a doubt.
And I want to just go back to, Sigourney for a second. Watching on the side, Jim and Sigourney talking before he calls action. You're seeing Jim talk to a mature woman, and they're having this dialogue that a director would have with any adult actor. Jim calls action, and she changed. She became a 14-year-old empath of herself on the set with these kids. They didn't look at her or feel that they were acting with someone who was older than them. They felt they were acting with someone their age. It was remarkable to see.
I don't want to paint her as John's half right, because she obviously brought the camera. But there was another layer to it, because there was a period we were doing this capture work for 18 months, and she was younger in her mind. She was younger when she stepped into the volume in the morning. I don't know what she was like in the makeup trailer, but by the time she crossed that line, like the boundary of a tennis court, into the volume, she was already younger. There was a playfulness, there was a lightness of spirit. It wasn't, I know Sig pretty well. It was Sig with just this kind of youthful spirit. And she maintained that the whole time. And I don't think she was that aware of it, because she's not like Daniel Day-Lewis, don't talk to me, talk to my character sort of thing, And I don't mean to sound mocking. I think that's a process that's yielded incredible results. It wasn't on that level, but there was something, she just carried Curie with her the whole time in this beautiful way, and she got out of the way. And I know this about Sig, that she, when we first worked together on Aliens, she was a little too logical, a little too intellectualizing about everything. And not that we clashed about it, but I always felt I had to draw her through that. Well, she had enough sort of self-awareness of her process by the time she got to this film, our third time working together, that she talks about, I just had to get out of Kiri's way. And she did that, you know, she did it in this amazing way. Now, there are certain things she just couldn't do at 70 that a 14-year-old, athletic, gazelle-like young girl could do. Jump up on a log if she felt like it, you know, or scamper up, you know, a vine. And Sigourney's, you know, was never scampery to begin with.
I'm gonna go with I was 75% right.
How about 80?
Okay.
About 80. That's my final offer. So what we did was we had a body double, or performance double, Alicia Vela Bailey, and Sigourney had worked with her before, knew her very well. And I said, all right, you guys figure it out. I said, Sigourney, you're in charge. You direct Alicia. You tell her what you want Kiri to do, right? I'd set the frame, you know, I'd set the challenge of the scenes on, you know, on the page or whatever. But then I'd let Sigourney work with Alicia. I gave her that power to direct her sort of part of the film herself. And so they'd just go off and work it out. And I felt that by empowering her to do that, she would always own Kiri even when it was something she physically couldn't do herself. And that's still only maybe 10% of the movie.
And with these 18 months of performance capture, how familiar are the actors with the environments that they're working in? Are they seeing concepts, or are you showing them before they perform? And how, because a lot of those sets are being designed after the fact.
We had most of the artwork done and most of the sets done, I'd say, by the time. No, the sets are all done ahead of time. No, because I'm working with a virtual camera that I'm using more or less as a viewfinder. So it's all there. By the point the actors come in, it's all there. So they're able to look at playback and see themselves as their characters in the world. But they don't. It's interesting.
Really?
At first there's a curiosity, especially the newer actors, the kids coming in, and they love to see themselves as their characters. And they'll play around, watch the monitor, be the character, and use that sort of mirror neuron thing, you know, actually as part of the craft to learn to walk a certain way and move a certain way. But really after the first few days, that what they're interested in is the playback of themselves shot by the reference cameras. So I'll do a virtual camera, you know, just a loose wide shot, not necessarily the final shot that's in the film, but just an idea of it. Kind of what a director does looking through the viewfinder, except a record of it. And we call that the A camera, but it doesn't have any validity downstream. I can do anything later. I can do a steady cam, close up, dolly, helicopter shot, whatever, from that capture. But what's really critical is there's 16 operators usually hand holding HD cameras with long zoom lenses, and they're punching in on everybody and getting a close up of the performance. Now, it's them in their head rigs and their black suits. The image has no final use. It's an interim image that we use in the editing process. So the actors will go over and they'll look at their close-ups. If they're interested in playback, the actors are much less interested in the world than they are in how the scene works between themselves and what they're doing. Some actors don't want to see the playback. They're happy if I'm happy. Sam, you know, if he's searching for something in a scene, he usually knows when he's, you know, some actors are kind of hard on themselves, but when he's got it, and it's usually by take 3 or 4, what he's looking for, he'll go over and watch it, and he has this kind of little code. He goes, oh, there's something there, and he'll walk away. He doesn't tell me to stop. He doesn't say that's it or that's the take. He goes, no, there's something there. And then I can go on, and if there's something I want in addition, that's fine. But that's his sort of code to me, that he's satisfied.
And before we ever get to the capture stage, we took the cast to Hawaii and we gave them a sense memory experience. We put them in the rainforest where Jim rehearsed with them, going through actual jungle and interacting with that environment. We put them in the water on reefs where they took the skills they had learned as breath holders and went down to reefs. And then we did perhaps what I think is the most Pandoran-like thing you could do here on Earth. We went on a night dive that sat at the bottom of the water, and out of the darkness came giant manta rays. And the cast was able to look up in this amazing wonder and reach up and touch their bellies like you see Sigourney doing, in that scene. And these were all experiences that they were able to bring back to the volume.
Yeah, so Cliff Curtis, for example, as a Maori, as an indigenous person of New Zealand, he actually had a big tattoo of a ray as part of his traditional moko, which is, it tells the story of him and his family and their lineage and all that sort of thing. And so when he had that experience with that ray, and these rays were acclimated to humans, it was kind of a feeding station, so they were fearless. They were coming right up to us. And I'm talking this far away. You see the ray's eye right there as it goes over you. That was like a spiritual thing for him. I know that was an important moment for him as an actor that he carried into his work. And the whole sense memory kind of journey in Hawaii was I think really important, because when we're in the volume, we don't have every leaf and every branch and every bit of vine, and it's not a slippery wet trail going over roots that are kind of slick and muddy and things like that. They had to remember all that. We give them what they need to interact with. If you need a vine or a root or something to pull yourself up a trail, fine, we'll give you that. But we can't surround you in the forest. We can't give you the smell of the forest and all that sort of thing. I mean, sometimes I'll run sound effects of birds and crickets and stuff like that. But it's kind of a little bit to set the tone. But they have to experience that, study it, break it down, deconstruct it, remember it, and then bring it into their work.
Yeah, and you feel it because there is this spirituality in this film that I think is really what makes it so memorable.
Well, one of the things that Jim talked about, Cliff. Cliff is from New Zealand, and Cliff did his performance capture work here. And Cliff approached me and said, "John, when you come down to New Zealand for your live action filming, which is where we did all of our live action, all of our post-production," he said, "can I bring my family down to the set the first day and do a blessing?" I said, that's so wonderful. Of course. I'm expecting a family of 4.
A bus shows up, 30 people get off.
That's right. And they come and they do a custom haka for us. They do a blessing for us. They give Jim and I individual gifts. Mine was an oar to help steer the production. And Cliff brought his spirituality and the Maori culture, to our set that day, and it was a really special moment.
We had to find a balance, obviously. We didn't want to just take Maori culture and clone it any more than we would have done, any culture anywhere. We had to kind of create this melange of influences. But clearly, in our design, we were leaning toward Polynesian culture in general. And I gave Cliff total permission to just incorporate whatever he wanted that made sense to him, from his own traditions. And there was a young Maori actor who was also one of the reef people, named Dwan, and they would kind of work together and say, let's do this, and it felt right to them, because there is this whole aspect of cultural appropriation, and we've got to be very careful about it. But that's why we tried to have as diverse a cast as possible, so there were all these different cultural influences. Zoe, for example, is originally from Dominican Republic, and so she's black, and she identifies as black and Latin, and so she has a cultural melange that she got to bring into it, and even the pronunciation of the language was strongly influenced by her Spanish as her primary language growing up, because her rolled and tapped R's and so on are really ideal. So the language was kind of constructed around her pronunciation. And the guy that designed the language, Paul Farmer, he used to correct her, and I'm like, yeah, Paul, I actually think when Zoe says it, that's the way it's supposed to. That's the language. Your version's good, but hers is correct.
Yeah, but
he never quite got that concept.
But it's exceptional. I mean, and the language is I think a big part. Also, why sound is such a big moment. Big part of this film too. And I mean, I can sit here all day with you two and keep going, but we actually do have to go to another Q&A. But I do want to congratulate you just on the history that this film has made, that both of these films have made, and they just, obviously, they mean so much to people around the world, and I know you're still on this journey, and so good luck.
And thank everybody for coming out to see it on the big screen.
Mhm.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thanks, everybody.